So I introduced her. Well, I thought that my RoRi was going to be at the end and the close.
At the end, no, yes, is what I said. Is what I said.
Yes.
I will introduce her.
Yes, of course.
And then you wrap up the session on the name of the Vice Director of Human Resources and stuff.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we are ready to start. Perhaps the colleagues of the organization can start the recording. Welcome, everybody. I think most of you that you haven't following this webinars, you can know me. I'm Eva Mendez, and the Deputy Vice President for Research Policies and Engage with Open Science. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the last session of Open Science Café. Bring your own coffee. You can just have your coffee and listen to a very nice speaker. I think somebody has an open microphone because I see some echo. If you can close your microphones. Thank you very much. So I was about introducing Sarah. That is my great pleasure to introduce you to her, because Sarah is the current head of the Center of Science and Technology Studies in the University of Leiden, the CWTS, which is a very famous center, and they are in charge of Leiden a ranking that is one of the only reasonable rankings I have ever seen in my life. And she has joined the center in 2011, and now is a professor in Science, Technology and Innovation Studies and Scientific Director of the Institute. And also she's engaged with the RoRi, which is another research center of research, which is meta research, which is something that we have in common. And on top of that, because she has a lot of time, she also has an ERC grant, a starting grant, in a European Research Council grant, a starting grant. And she has been very well known for all the strong research that she has been doing in social studies of research evaluation. She has an amazing CV. You can just see it in the webpage. I don't want to read it. I just only want to share with you that when I met her, I say, I want you, my community in my university, to listen to you, because it's really interesting her perception about how we can do science better and have a research evaluation that is according to the current times and open science. So, Sarah, I don't want to just steal more time. The floor is yours. The screen in this context is yours. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Eva, for that really kind introduction. Can you hear me properly? Just double checking.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to this, also to learn from you after I've given input for about half an hour, I think. So what I will do is discuss, well, the context is open science, obviously, and then we focus on rewards and incentives and initiatives that are instigated to do more responsible research assessment. And in a couple of talks I've given in the past few weeks, I've been using this quote, and that's because I love it a lot. It's from a book by Kathleen Fitzpatrick. It's a fantastic book on how universities can become more generous. So she, in that book, invites us to all basically think constructively instead of focusing on competition, and also focusing on building new ideas, and listening over speaking, and collaboration over competition is a very important trope, and community over individualism. And it's of course something that is harder or easier to do in certain contexts and in certain national systems and in certain ways in which the science system and the evaluation systems are organized. So in your context, that looks very different from mine, for instance. But there are some common threads in what we are, I think, all struggling with. So this book is one of the few that actually focuses on, well, how to become more generous. And I really like that initiative. And it's also really close to my heart. It's what drives me as well. So I wish I would have written it, I think, this book, because a lot of the work I do focuses on studying carefully in meta research, indeed, as Eva said, how evaluation plays out on the shop floor. So in different disciplines, in labs, between supervisor and PhD student, and really focus on these dynamics as they happen. So both in formal contexts, yearly appraisals and assessment exercises, but also in the daily work of doing research. So I'd like to share a story that resulted in that ERC project that Eva just mentioned. And that is a story that started with a very disturbing email I received from an Italian marine biologist. And his name is Nando Buero. And he wrote to me that he was quite frustrated because he was unable to get his findings published in key journals in his field, as he used to do, because it was easier for him a while ago. But now it's more difficult. And he studies the occurrence of swarms of jellyfish blooms, and more specifically, why we see the high numbers of bloom periods in recent years, which is totally not trivial, because rising numbers of blooms also are an important indication that the ecology of seas and oceans are disturbed. So he got in touch with me. He read one of my articles about the role of performance indicators in the life sciences, and that had confirmed his belief that science is not being properly evaluated today. So he mentioned in his field, marine biology and ocean sciences at large, that there are strict norms, how they are translated into the national science system in Italy. And what he wrote to me, and I'd like to show you a quote of that. So as an established researcher, he collaborates a lot on policy reports, but that it actually would harm his university if he would include these reports as output in evaluations. Because they are not published in international peer-reviewed journals, they have no journal impact factor. So what he went on to say was, but I want to make clear that this output is much more valuable than anything I've published in my career to date. However, the current evaluation mechanisms do not assess its true value. I've written manuals for students, given scientific advice to policymakers, but that counts for nothing in the academic world. I also don't add my name unnecessarily to articles written by colleagues. And so my publication numbers are decreasing. And according to the current evaluation criteria, I'm lazier now than I was in the past. And that's the end of the quote. The language he uses is quite strong. It's also how I gotten to know him afterwards. But this type of quote reflects something that a lot of people, I think, recognize. And I wonder if you do as well. And maybe we can talk about that after the talk. It is something that is also discussed at a general level, how the science system is operating. So this is a comment by Philip Ball. He's a science writer and editor of Nature. And in that piece, he describes how science has changed over the past century towards, for instance, more team science, big science, and towards fulfilling also its social contract by confronting issues of global reach and existential urgency, words he uses, including climate breakdown. And with foresight, it was, I think, November 2019 that he wrote this, also epidemics. So Ball and many other critics, pundits, they signal important changes to the institutions that underpin research, including, for instance, research communication. Can papers, can monographs still contain the research results of today? Is one of the things that's often discussed. But not only research communication, but also evaluation systems at large. So do systems of credit still work to acknowledge the diversification of roles in research? or are they actually failing? And I think the answer to that question, unfortunately, is yes, they are. So, and especially in the last, well, 3 to 5, 7 years, we clearly see that the concern has intensified over the issues I've put here on the slide. So the misapplication of metrics, which contributes to enormous pressures on researchers and also deepens problems with research integrity and reproducibility. And we also see a reduction of the diversity of research missions and purposes. And that leads institutions and also researchers to adopt similar strategic priorities or to focus on lower risk and incremental work. And then there are issues with systemic biases to those who do not meet or do not wish to meet, choose to meet narrow criteria and indicators of quality or impact. And what you also see is a diversion of attention in policy and management to things that can be measured at the expense of less tangible and also less quantifiable qualities. One of the things that I think highlights the issue is this streetlight effect of indicators. What I find both interesting and deeply worrisome is that what we currently see happening too often is that we resort to easy-to-use indicators and metrics. Think of the journal impact factor, think of the H-index, and we do that to assess science and scientists, and we do that on the basis of availability, easy access of data about performance. And what we're not doing is looking for answers but beyond the streetlights, and that's called the streetlight effect. So what you see here on this slide is a very schematic representation of the issue, and in the largest circle is a representation of all the potential problems in the world. And within that space, so the blue area, is the space of research. So in principle, those problems that can, not necessarily are, but can be addressed by doing research. And within that space, you have in yellow that smaller space of research that is currently undertaken and that is also stimulated more and is well illuminated by the most common indicators we use to assess research and researchers. So what the issue here is that we tend to start to mistake the light with the actual problems. And it's really hard to defend that what's out there in those grayer zones is not relevant. But it is important to realize that questions dealt with by research under the streetlights is better rewarded, often at the expense of other forms of research and other activities. That is then sometimes treated as a purely technical issue, database issue or metrics issue, but it's also not, because what's left out isn't exactly random, and there's a politics of in and exclusion. So it's partly technical, but it's also social and political. Think about marginalization on a couple of fronts, so topics outside of the mainstream, but also parts of the work done by social sciences and humanities that aren't covered well enough in citation databases. But also think of non-English publications, which also don't count in the same way. In fact, whole sectors are less visible under the streetlights, including low-tech research, but also agricultural research, research done by and also with the creative industry. And those are just a few examples of marginalized areas. So what I think the responsible metrics community and also the responsible research assessment community is trying to propagate is this move you see here on the slide. We should use research evaluation and indicators to our advantage and let them help us open up and also broaden out what can be researched. Now, I'd like to take you through 2 initiatives I was involved in that are related to responsible research evaluation and open science, but I'll start with the specific focus on responsible assessment and metrics, just to provide some context of what's out there. Some of you may know this, but this is an initiative that, together with other colleagues in the bibliometric and research evaluation and research policy space, we developed in 2015. That's the Leiden Manifesto for research metrics. And it's a distillation of best practice in metrics-based research assessment. So assuming that we use metrics in research assessment, what is the proper way of doing that? I'd like to take you briefly through those 10 principles to provide some context. So these 10 are contextualized in the larger comment in the manifesto. And the first, quantitative evaluation should support qualitative expert assessment. So it shouldn't supplant it, but should support it. It's interesting and informative to use quantitative metrics because they also can challenge bias tendencies in peer review and also facilitate deliberation. And it could strengthen, and it should strengthen peer review, because making judgments about colleagues is difficult without a range of relevant information. Assessors shouldn't be tempted to use solely numbers or relying on only the use of numbers, and indicators should not supplant informed judgment. So that's what that principle is about. The second is about measuring performance against the research missions of the institution or the group or the researcher. And this may sound, I don't know if it does, but it may sound obvious, but it is often forgotten. Program goals should be stated at the start, or missions of an individual researchers, what's the purpose of the work, should be stated at the start. And then the indicators used to evaluate performance should relate to those goals. And as I think most of us know, academics do more than publishing. And that type of work is often also left out in assessment context. Now, 3 is about protecting excellence in locally relevant research. So in many parts of the world, excellence is equated with English language publication. And the impact factor is calculated for journals indexed in the US-based and still mostly English language Web of Science. And these biases are particularly problematic when other languages are used in scholarly publishing, including Spanish. And it's also problematic for parts of the social sciences and humanities in which research is more regionally and also nationally engaged. So this type of pluralism that is in the system tends to be suppressed to create papers of interest for these high impact English language journals. And that's problematic. 4 is keep data collection and analytical processes open, transparent and simple. So the construction of the databases, for instance, that are required for evaluation should follow clearly stated rules, and they should be set before the research has been completed. And you see a lot of new entrants, new commercial entrants to this space, and they should also be held to the same standards. So no one should accept black boxed evaluation processes. 5 reads, allow those evaluated to verify data and analysis. So that is to ensure data quality. So all researchers included in bibliometric studies should be able to check that their outputs have been correctly identified. And everyone directing and managing these processes should also assure data accuracy through self-verification or a third-party audit. This is something that universities should also implement in their research information systems, should be a guiding principle in the selection of providers of these systems. Now 6 reads account for variation by field in publication and citation practices, and that is best practice. So it is important to take these cultural differences into account, and also to select a suite of possible indicators and allow fields to choose among them. Principle 7 is again about this qualitative judgment. So base assessments of individual researchers on a qualitative judgment of their portfolio. There's a lot going on in this space, also at funding agencies globally, to work towards a more narrative-based CV. We can also talk about that later if you want. But this principle states that reading and judging a researcher's work is much more appropriate than relying on one number. And even when comparing large numbers of researchers, an approach that considers more information about an individual's expertise and experience and activities and influence is best. The 8th principle is avoid misplaced concreteness and false precision. This is basically about the journal impact factor and what that does in practices. So, but it is also about other indicators, but it figures prominently in journal impact factor dynamics, that the 2, 3, 4 numbers behind the comma play a role in how people perceive journals. And this principle says, well, that's just not very smart. It's a misplaced concreteness and is false precision. The 9th and 10th are, I guess, more sociological points about recognizing systemic effects of assessments and indicators. So these indicators do something. They change the systems through the incentives that they establish. And that's also good, because you can also raise quality, and it can have emancipatory effects. But you should really monitor what the type of effects are in practice and see if the system needs to be scrutinized and indicators need to be updated regularly, and also fit the local purposes and fit with the missions of the research. So that's the Leiden Manifesto. The second initiative before we can open up for discussion is this UNESCO recommendation on open science. This is, I think, interesting, and maybe also to discuss a little bit, because it's representative of a move from open science to a global level. It's currently being prepared. UNESCO, almost 200 member states tasked the organization with developing an international standard-setting instrument on open science in the form of this UNESCO recommendation. And that's done by UNESCO because it is the United Nations agency with a mandate for science. So it's also seen as the legitimate global organization to build this coherent vision on openness, and also a shared set of overarching principles and shared values. And with 3 colleagues, I'm representative of the Western European and North American states. And in that capacity, I also contributed to writing the recommendation. Now, as you can see here, although you can debate about the terminology of open science, for instance, in the UK context, they use the slightly more inclusive terminology of open research. But the operationalization of the term open science is, I think, very broad and inclusive in the recommendation. It combines various movements and practices aiming to make scientific knowledge more openly available, and also accessible and reusable for everyone, and also to increase scientific collaborations and information sharing, and also to open up this process of knowledge production to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. It also includes all scientific disciplines and aspects of scholarly practices, including basic and applied sciences, natural sciences, social sciences, humanities. And it builds on the following key pillars, and I think I have a slide on those. Yes, here it is. So open access to scientific knowledge, open infrastructures, open communication, open engagement with societal and of societal actors, and also open dialogue with other knowledge system. So it's a broad interpretation of openness, including open access, but not restricted to it. The key objectives of this recommendation are listed here. I'd like to take you through them briefly and then focus on one that is about evaluation. So the first is promoting a common understanding of open science, its associated benefits and challenges, and also the diverse paths towards reaching open science. Because it's a global effort, this is a very important objective to create this common understanding. The second is to develop an enabling policy environment for open science. There's a lot of work in different parts of the world needed to foster openness in policy as well. It takes investing. It takes investing in infrastructures and also services, but also in human resources, in education, digital literacy, capacity building for open science. Something, all of these things Eva knows quite well as well. And the fifth is fostering a culture of open science and aligning incentives for open science. I'll get back to that one shortly. And the final is promoting innovative approaches for open science at different stages of the scientific process. Now I'll zoom in on that incentives one, because I think it's an absolutely crucial one in my view. I'm not objective because this is also my focus, of course, but I'm really happy that these two elements come together in this recommendation. So it takes a global initiative like this to break the barriers in the way we assess researchers, also to change this culture in research, and to reward researchers also for sharing and for collaborating, and also for engaging with society. So it specifies that this requires a combined effort, many different stakeholders, so including funders, including universities, journals, scientific societies, across countries and also across disciplines. And we also recommend under this fifth key objective to closely review assessment and career evaluation systems in order to align them with open science. Because I guess we all realize that a commitment to open science requires also time, it requires actions and resources that don't automatically lead to a publication in the traditional sense, or are explicitly not supposed to do that, but which can have significant impact on science, but also on society. So we also thirdly recommend to promote the development of, and also the implementation of, evaluation and assessment systems that build on existing efforts in the way we evaluate scientific outputs. So the initiatives, that are aimed at improving how we do that, including the DORA declaration. So initiatives that say, okay, we should focus on quality instead of quantity. We shouldn't solely rely on indicators that are very narrowly looking at certain types of publications, but we need more wide-ranging sets of indicators that go beyond journal-based metrics. And also to promote evaluation systems that give value to all relevant research activities and outputs, including also high-quality fair data, metadata, well-documented reusable software, etc. and also to promote systems that take into account evidence of impact and knowledge exchange. And that is also openness. So widening participation in the research process, influence on policy and practice, and engaging in open innovation. And of course, systems that also take into account the diversity of disciplines and also different career stages, which is a really hard thing to do as well, with particular attention to researchers at the beginning of their careers. Now, this recommendation further says that the member states should ensure that the practice of open science is a known and well understood standardized element in recruitment and promotion criteria, that all stakeholders are encouraged to adopt policies that require and reward open access to knowledge, including publications and data and software and code and hardware, and that we ensure that there's diversity in scholarly communications and that people adhere to the principles of open and transparent and equitable access, also by supporting non-commercial and also collaborative publishing models. Now, to round off the timeline for this UNESCO recommendation, so we started working on that in November 2019, sent a first draft to the member states last September 2020. Reworked it, a final draft was sent to the member states again in March of this year, and then it was examined for technical and legal elements in all the member states in May. And now an approved draft will be submitted to member states in August, with hopefully adoption of the recommendation in November 2021, something I'm really looking forward to because I hope it makes a splash. Now, to close off, I think the UNESCO recommendation and a couple of other initiatives I couldn't discuss right now are really indicative of a progressive engagement with open science on a global scale. There are many, many regional differences in where people are and where an infrastructure is and where a system is or can be, but there's really movement. That's promising. It's also interesting to see that there's this move from an initial focus on open access to a more holistic focus on fostering a healthy research culture. And I think that is reflected very well in the principles and the key objectives of the UNESCO recommendation. So that ends on a positive note. I'm sure there will also be a lot of things in our discussion that are maybe less positive at the moment, and that we can really talk about how to further work towards more responsible assessment practices. So I'm really looking forward to opening up the floor and want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for such an inspiring talk. I do really agree with you, as you can imagine, but I do really want to hear some of the questions that I have been seeing in the chat, and I was trying to just post the links of the Leiden Manifesto and also the other resources of making science measured differently. But I think the message that you transmit is that sometimes when we work in the university on the assessment, we measure things that they don't matter, and the things that matter cannot be measured. So I think that your light on it's very, very significant. Is the image that I was twittering when you were talking. We put the accent in the paper, and we miss the problems and the solutions that the world needs. And I think COVID-19 has been very puts the light on the other side of the road. So I would like to open the floor for other questions, and I don't want to just ask myself because okay, here you have something in the chat. I will recommend people to open the microphone. You can participate directly because it's more effective when you transmit your own thoughts and your own questions. I think Esther was having a question there. Can you open your microphone?
It looks like she has trouble with her microphone.
Okay, well, so can you pick it up from the chat?
Let me see. So the quote you mentioned, recent years do not give me hope, but they give me purpose. Do you believe that new mechanisms to assess the true value of research will be forced to come out directly if the majority of researchers switch to publishing open science? Yeah. That's yeah. So that's a question about where the agency lies, I guess. Up until this point, most of the discussion has been about what influential actors in the system, so including like funders, should do, or what institutions should do to enable researchers to, or enforce researchers to start to display open behavior. But I think your point comes from the other end. So what if we all start to do this? How can then the system hopefully also start to change? I think that is an under discussed, and I think also maybe undervalued potential of what a community could do. A lot of the times discussions I'm having, researchers feel that they are relatively powerless in systems of recognition and reward or open science. Whilst I wonder if the passion of communities could actually not affect more. I don't know if that really answers your question. It's of course hard to pick up from your text if this is really the direction you were thinking in. But yeah, that was the start of an answer maybe. Okay, thanks, Esther.
Okay, Ramiro, can you open your microphone?
Yes, I have a question for Mrs. Rijcke. You have said that the space of research efforts is being smaller and smaller because of factors such as narrow publication criteria, and that open science promotes cooperation on a national and international level. In your opinion, would promoting cooperation instead of competition using tools such as open science broaden this space of research amongst universities and research institutes?
Yes, absolutely. And the ambition, I think, is from the UNESCO recommendation is to then also align incentives. So to open up that space for research, that to broaden out that space that I showed with the streetlight effect, right? So if we recognize and reward more types of collaboration across fields, but also across sectors, and we take that seriously in our academic hiring and promotion practices, I think you will definitely see that. But I think that both are necessary. So also building these into the official criteria that we use to assess researchers at an individual level, but also group level, university level, and systems level.
Yes, so the individual and group work are both necessary.
Yeah, and I think most of the evaluation systems I'm familiar with make distinctions between the individual level. For instance, when you are hired for a certain new position or are up for promotion, and the criteria that are used to decide whether you're fit for a new position or up for promotion should start to reflect open science in its broader sense. So open access publications, but also democratization of the types of partnerships that we are involved in. And many of us already do that, but it's very difficult to do when a system evaluates you on a very particular type of task in publishing in high impact journals, in English language journals, and doesn't look at the other missions of your work and also doesn't reflect open science ambitions.
Totally agree with you, Sarah. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
Michelle, can you open your microphone or just speak you from the chat, Sarah?
Oh, sorry. Let me scroll down. Yeah, so that's a remark, more than a question, I guess. So it's important to include the culture of native and indigenous people in all research. Yes, so that is also something I could have made more explicit in the slides, but it's a very important part of the UNESCO recommendation. So multiple places, this point you just raised, I totally agree with, comes back as one of the founding elements of opening up and inclusion and diversity. So it's a very important point. Thank you for raising it.
It is true. It's something that I think UNESCO, since they have such a global perception, they really underline the equity that sometimes when you work only at European level, you forget.
Yes.
But I think it's fantastic. And also I pointed out in the chat that in the Research Data Alliance, there is also a lot of groups dealing with not only with the FAIR principles of research data, but also principles for inclusiveness of the indigenous people. It's a field that I don't really know very well, but I think it's an amazing area.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it wasn't even a point for discussion in the team that worked on the recommendation. It's also not my area of expertise, but it was very interesting how it was immediately taken up as one of the elements that would be in the recommendation. There was no discussion about it.
Great. I don't know if I just jump into some. There was a doctoral student talking about plagiarism, but I don't remember. Oh, yeah, it was Aman. Can you chime in and open your microphone and elaborate a bit more your question about the plagiarism something?
And there's also a technical issue with the microphone.
Yeah, well.
I'm trying to figure out if I understand the question correctly. Is plagiarism?
That's the point, is I didn't understand it the way I want to him to.
Maybe you can clarify a little bit in the chat what you would like to discuss, Amar?
Assessment of plagiarism. Oh, well, probably you were talking about academic integrity, the things that we do in the universities with Turnitin and this kind of anti-plagiarism thing, because research integrity is another very important issue that we have to evaluate and to construct a new research integrity. I mean, all these questions are important, but I don't know if there is the point of the question.
Yeah, it's indeed one of the elements of a healthy research culture. But I think I also agree with the point that it's also about quality. So it's not only about hygiene, but it's also about quality. If we look at plagiarism or to prevent plagiarism, there's also a lot of debate that you might be more familiar with about how those types of techniques are inserted into context of education and also research that may sometimes also have some problematic elements to it. But that is with all technology, and similar with the indicators and standardization efforts, there's usually always a downside to also scrutinize and be aware of. But I do think it's very, very much connected to the question of quality. Yeah. Have you seen a cultural change in your university? So in my own university, you mean Paula? I guess so. Yes. Well, what's interesting about the Dutch context, can talk very long about that. I won't, but we're going through a process of at a national level that is relevant maybe for today as well. So there was a knowledge coalition formed. All the universities, all the medical centers, 2 large funders all said we need the system to change, and we're going to tackle this at a national level. And they've said we need more openness, we need more quality over quantity. So some of the points that we've been talking about today come together in a position paper published at the end of 2019. And now all universities in the Netherlands are tasked to work out what that means for their own local contexts. So in the Leiden context, I think, so personally for me, I've been working on this issue for 10 years now. So it feels very, very timely, or maybe late, that we're finally starting to do this also in the Netherlands. But so I'm co-chairing a steering committee in Leiden that brings an advice to the board of the university for how we can more responsibly do evaluation and talent management. And it's so Eva said Leiden is a fantastic university, and it is, but in some respects there's also a long way to go. So we do see changes and movements on the open science front, but we also didn't sign DORA, for instance, at Leiden, and I think that is problematic. LERU, one of the network of League of Universities that are at a relatively high esteem, Leiden is also part of that. LERU signed DORA, so they are against misuse of the general impact factor, for instance, but Leiden hasn't committed to that. So it will, I think, take a bit more time, even in my own local context, for a couple of steps to be taken. But I must admit, I mean, in the Dutch context, all of the evaluation mechanisms are already relatively forward-looking, literally. So it's about learning and less about accountability and punishing, and like that kind of direct link with funding and assessments doesn't exist officially. Of course, there are many ways in which it is still related to the distribution of resources. But I think it's a less harsh system than some of the other systems we have in Europe. So in that respect, we're already relatively moving in the right direction, but more can be done.
That's a very interesting conversation, because it goes to the different countries and how you can assess evaluation. For example, in Spain, it's pretty much centralized because we have a national agency of research evaluation. So this is the one that it has to be the first moved. But in the Netherlands, you have the authority inside the university. So it's easier to have your own. But I have a question, and I will pass the floor to some other students. They have an amazing question before. But I was just to elaborate a bit more on this. Do you think there is any kind of relationship that Leiden is a LERU university? LERU university, they are high-ranked universities in Europe. They are very much keen on being in the rankings. What is the relationship about this signing DORA and resigning the rankings at some point? Because I have this discussion with Melbourne University. That was the first university in the whole Australia that signed DORA. And I say, well, but Melbourne is in the top 50. How do you think it's going to affect the signature? Because the impact factor is in the rankings, and I think they are the cancer of the thing. What is your relationship about the ranking and the whole thing?
Yeah, that's really a very difficult practice to change. And it's also very, very present in Leiden as well. Yeah, it's yesterday I received an email from someone. I'll anonymize it, but it's someone picked up on a comment that one of our professors made in a workshop, and he mentioned that he was held accountable for publishing in the top 25 range of JIF journals in his field, in his discipline, in order for him to be promoted to a professor. And that is in the Leiden University context. And I find that, of course, very problematic, because we've also published the Leiden Manifesto. but we haven't or the board of the university has not yet enforced a culture change by, for instance, signing DORA. And the Leiden Manifesto is something you can't sign, but I think you can still, of course, endorse it in your work and your practices. So at the moment, there's a lot of freedom for decision makers in different faculties and parts of the organization to work with their own rules. And I do think one of the arguments for enforcing high impact journal publications is indeed that link with the ranking. And yeah, that's a very problematic assumption and a very narrow definition of quality.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm asking Carlos if he can just open the microphone, because he has a very interesting insight in the chat, and I think it's worth it to listen to him.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My question was about, because nowadays publishing is a very important topic. Even there is time that you have done some research, and even if you want to publish it, it's better to split it in different articles so you have more publication. And even there are cases in which the people who make the review about your paper, they recommend you to put some papers, so you give them the site of themselves. So there is like a little bit of selfishness or a little evil, because they use this kind of tools for themselves. So do you think that if we change the metric or use another type of methods, will dealing to this problem will disappear, or this is something about, I don't know, humanity, about selfless, or I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess some people will always behave badly and they will try to game the system. We probably cannot change that. But I am positive about the effect of changing the criteria, because your two examples are directly reflecting the ways in which people are assessed, or journals are assessed. So the one is about salami slicing. If you are assessed on the basis of the number of articles you publish, this is a strategic behavior you could start to see. The other is about the boosting of the citation counts of your journal to boost your impact factor. So these are very clear ways in which gaming happens. But if we broaden out the type of criteria we use in assessments, and we link them to the missions of academics in the broader sense. So that's not only publishing, it's more than publishing. And if you publish, that doesn't mean you have to publish only in these high impact journals. If we take seriously those types of recommendations, you will not stimulate the types of behavior you just gave examples of. Maybe something else will then start to happen. This is also why in the Leiden Manifesto we put in these recommendations about scrutinizing indicators regularly and also being aware of these systemic effects. So the examples you gave, we need to start to rework the system in order to avoid that type of behavior.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very interesting, Carlos. Thank you for your question, and thank you everybody for the questions. I think we have 2 minutes to go. It has been very, very interesting, this discussion. I was thinking that it will be the most active discussion. Let's give room to this last question, and then I will pass the floor to Monse for closing up. Can you open your microphone, Blanca, please? Or would you like Sarah to take it from the chat?
can't use mic. Okay, do you feel new metrics will surely help open science and exchange? Do you feel open science will bring science closer to the citizens and in some way this will help science? Yes, that's one of the things that I think many scientists that are already engaged really look forward to. But I think much work needs to be done. This is not my area of research, but it's something that that I'm really looking forward to seeing happen more often, because I think that can have huge benefits for scholarly work as well. And not everywhere, not in all fields and not all the time, but making more space for it than there is now, I think can only be beneficial. And we really need that, because we need to tackle a couple of large issues together. We can't only do that with our own brilliant minds.
Thank you so much. So now, yes, I think we are ready to close. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and your attendance. And I think it has been a terrific session. And now I would like to give the floor to our Vice Director of Human Resources, that is the one that has to wrap up this session and the whole sessions of the cafés. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Eva. I am Montse Abad, Deputy Vice Rector for Faculty, and well, this is an honor for me to be here. Thank you very much, Sarah, for your great talk. It has been very inspiring to hear about the rewards and incentives for the open science. You have brought many interesting ideas to expand our horizons, bringing that manifesto, the best practices, and the last developments. And well, your analysis has been very useful. And well, I should add that these aspects are very important for our university, as our strategic plan, which our current strategic plan, which covers the period from 2016 to 2022, foresees the goal to increase the visibility and impact of science. It foresees an open and accessible knowledge, and there is an institutional mandate for open access. So beyond the main and usual benefits of open science, to promote a more accurate verification of scientific results, and to reduce duplication in collecting, creating, and transferring scientific material, we would like to refocus also on the transfer to society. And I like very much how you highlighted the potential to put emphasis on creativity and collaboration versus individualism and other problems, as for instance competition when it is excessive. So we are very proud to belong to the UFI Alliance among different young European universities, and among them, there is another university from the Netherlands, which is Maastricht, but there are others as Essex, Bremen, among others. And one of the main objectives is to promote the open science as well. And in the framework of the Charter and Code, the European Charter and Code, the Carlos III University was granted the logo, HR is for R, in 2016, in December of 2016, and we hope to renew the logo this year. And well, that's why we have to promote with a special emphasis this kind of activities, and in this framework the Vice Rector for Faculty and the Vice Rector for Research Policies have launched this set of 6 seminars or 6 open science cafes, and I would like to thank in particular Eva Mendez, the Deputy Vice Rector for Policy Research, Research Policy, sorry, for her valuable initiative and her valuable task in coordinating all these 6 seminars on different and significant topics. Thank you very much, Eva, and thank you very much also to all the attendees for your so smart question and your indispensable role. Thank you very much for being there. Thank you all. So it is closed.
Thank you for kind words. I hope the strategic plan HR logo give you a further vehicle for affecting positive change around openness. Wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you all.